as a RAM, random access memories, you know, where each of the instruction operands are stored 1 and 2, and the result is also stored in a memory, right? And once the memory is read from the data, which is called as a data memory, which is called as RAM, and then it's returned back onto a register where you desire it to store, right? So currently, if you ask in the brain where we are storing, our brain is so intelligent enough that we can store anywhere, either in the right part of the brain or in any register, because we think it is very trivial. 1 plus 2 equal to 3 is very trivial. On the other hand, let me give a 8-digit number to be added. And I'm going to tell that number 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is 6, 7, 8, and 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Add them. So certainly you need a sheet of paper and a pencil, or probably you need to first register it in your memory and then slowly add one after the another from units all the way up to tens, hundreds, thousand, etc. Right? So here the same operation is done by the memory, data memory, and registering it in a file, and later on it is displayed by your printf command or your write command or readln command through the programming language to the visual display unit, your results. So this is very important. So that's why I'm going to spend about another 5 slides on this function. So when an instruction fetch happens, what actually happens? So there is a program counter and the fetch instruction from the memory into the instruction register, which is called as IR register, right? And the program counter is incremented by 4 to address the next sequential instruction. So because it requires 4 clock cycles to conduct an instruction as per our initial definition. So IR, the instruction register, holds the instruction that will be used in the next stage. Now, the next program counter holds a value which we call it as PC plus 1. Program counter plus 1. Or, if you're using C language, you say I plus plus. You say I equal to 0, then subsequently you say I equal to I plus plus or I plus plus, right? So that is what we do here. This is next program counter holds a value and it is passed on to the next stage. So instruction register holds it, register decodes it, execution happens, memory address is fetched, and in the memory address fetched, it writes the results. So this is how instruction fetch happens. Now let's look at instruction decode. What does decode does? Instruction access register, the instruction register it accesses to read the register, which is IR. The outputs of the general purpose register. There are multiple general purpose registers, AX, BX, CX, DX, right? AX is called as accumulator, BX is called as a base register, etc. And CX is for counting, and DX is for data, etc. Right? So we'll use one of the registers. It could be a temporary registers, an accumulator, right? And then we read into 2 temporary registers A and B. I'm just naming it as A and B here. It could be AX, BX, right? Register A or register B, whatever you want to call. And we extend the sign into lower 16 digits because your system is either a 16-bit system computer or a 32-bit computer or 64-bit computers. So depending on the bits, your register size will differ. So if it is a 16-bit microprocessor, you'll have a 16-bit registers, right? So that's why I'm taking 16 bits here, and then it passed on to the next stage. So it decodes everything here. It takes the full cycle 2, right? 4 cycles. And then now it goes on to the next stage of execute address calculation. So now it has to execute find the results, keep the results, and then get an address to store them, right? So we perform operation on an arithmetic logic unit, the microprocessor component, and it does the operation there. If the address calculation has been done and it is found, then we need to find a memory address to store, right? So it goes, the condition is 0 because the function has been computed. Then it goes on to the next one for memory access. Then ALU does nothing, it's just keeping the results ready. It's waiting for an access to a memory. And once the memory is achieved, then it stores. So we can say A equal to memory previous B. I'm just taking an example here. This is not from any textbook, it's an example. I'm just saying, okay, it is stored in my ALU, and hence I'm bringing that data into this memory address. And then we write back into the register. So we might have picked up some registers, let's say DX register. So then we need to write back onto that register, which takes another cycle, right? So this is how the entire processes happen for an instruction at different cycles when an instruction is done in a pipeline manner. Any questions at this point in time? Because there's a little difficult slide to understand. Any questions? I take it as no. Okay, then let me continue that. So what are the limitations and challenges? In textbooks, you call it as hazards, right? In my view, I would not call it as a hazard, because I would just call it that, okay, it is a limitation or a design limitation when we design the microprocessor. And hence, for the users, it creates a hazard. I would put it that way, right? But pipeline by themselves are not hazardous. You get it, I guess, right? So it's a more of a limitation. For example, if I have to give an example of a limitation, you are coming to college by a bicycle, let's assume, right? You are coming by a bicycle. So the bicycle does not have a gear, does not have a clutch, does not have a speeder, accelerator essentially. There are bicycles with clutch and gear, but you have to pedal. You're pedaling, the pedaling speed is a speed at which you can accelerate, right? Now let's take a two-wheeler. Two-wheeler has got the automatic two-wheeler. Let's take, okay, there is no gear mechanism, but there is an auto speeding mechanism, right? So can I say that cycle is not good or cycle is hazardous? Answer is no, right? Cycle is also a means of communication, where you can travel from a position A to a destination B. A two-wheeler, an automatic two-wheeler is also a transport vehicle where you can travel from a location A to location B. But the way in which it reaches, the features that it has are all different, right? So you cannot always compare a cycle with a two-wheeler to a geared vehicle to a car and to a truck and so on and so forth. So each one have been designed in such a way that it is for some specific purposes. So is the pipeline concept in computers today. And this concept is very much used. We use in our daily life also. When we think about some solutions, our brain do things about pipelining mechanisms. So I would call these as limitations, not hazards, right? But the book always calls it as hazards, and hence I'm retaining that word hazard in my presentation also. But I just want to clarify, limitation, challenges, hazards all means the same, in my opinion. I would call it as a design limitation. So it prevents next instruction from executing during its designated clock cycle. And so what are the limitations? So there are hardware related limitations. It cannot support the combination of instructions. Let's say if I want to do add versus multiply, then factorial, all combinations in a single instruction, then probably a pipeline may not be a good approach. Or probably you have to write addition software separately, multiplication software separately, factorial program separately, and then write another program to combine all of this. That's possible. Can we use pipeline? Yeah, still I can use, but in a different way of programming, right? The second one is the data hazards. Instruction depends on the result of the previous instruction. See, for example, if I want to prepare a cup of coffee, right? There are stages. First I need to prepare hot water, then I have to prepare a filter decoction, then I have to find milk, heat up the milk, then I have to combine milk and coffee, then add sugar for the people who are not diabetic, and for those people who are diabetic, do not add sugar. So these are all different stages, and these stages will have to go through. And the data is here. It depends on the previous next instruction. So the next instruction is getting the coffee filtered decoction, or getting the milk is the next instruction, right? So without which a coffee cannot be prepared. Next is the control hazards. This is more towards this control hazards is more towards jumping or branching locations. Let's say you decided to come to college, and on the way there is a road blockage. So you need to take a branch. You need to take a deviation. We call it as deviation, right? And you go to another place and you find another block. Then you take a deviation. That is, in computer terminology, is called as branches, right? So if you use goto in traditional Fortran, goto, or in C, if you use terminate the result here, and then I will look for another function to be called, then you are jumping from one function to another function, or one module to another module. So that is called as branches. So the common solution is to stall the pipeline until the hazard is resolved. So what people do is, okay, let me stop the pipeline so that somehow I will remove the bottleneck. So if it is hardware related, just 1 second, I pressed the wrong key. So if the hardware will have to be modified, then the designers of microprocessors, either Intel or ARM or Qualcomm, they have to decide and change the combination of the processor and hardware instructions, to address this. Whereas data and control are with the designers of the microprocessor as a board, as a single board computer, or with the programmers, how I want to handle my data. Okay, I've written a wrong instruction where it is depending. Okay, let me remove this dependency by another mechanism, by using a different registers, or using memory, or using virtual memory, or using cache, etc. Right? Control hazards, again, there are branches of pipeline. I will change my program counter accordingly so that I will get rid of this hazard. So that way, this hazard can be resolved at a programming level in these two cases, but at a structural level, probably it is in the next version of the microprocessor, it can be changed. So there are something called as a word bubbles are used in pipeline. That means bubble means, it is a blockage, like your traffic block. The bubble happens there, We call it in computer terminology, in computer literature, they call it as bubble. It represents a stage in a pipeline that cannot perform any useful work because there is no data available, or the earlier pipeline has stalled, or it is not able to process, the register is not able to access, memory is not readable or writable, etc. So then we call that as bubble. So if I have to put this in very simple terms, what are these structural data and control hazard means, and what are all the resolution that we can have? It's a condition that lead to incorrect behavior in simple. So incorrect behavior of the processor, the answer may be no. The incorrect way in which we are trying to ask the microprocessor to execute using the principle of pipelining, right? So the structural hazard, just 1 second, my laptop is not charging. Okay, I've just put it on to charge. Okay, so in structural hazard, two different instructions use the same hardware in the same cycle, right? So then it becomes difficult. Two different instructions use the same pipeline and want the same cycle to use. It's just not possible, right? So it will create conflicts, and results will not be delivered. In data hazard, what happened? Two different instructions use the same storage, same memory location. So it's a conflict. You cannot, if two people try to access a same computer in the computer lab, it's not possible. Only one person can use a computer at a time is the definition, and hence only one person can sit in the computer. So if two people are trying to access, it's not possible, right? And control hazard is the one which affects the instruction of the next instruction. Let's say you are doing a project in one computer and you have not yet completed, but the other batch of students are ready to come in. So either you have to abruptly stop, or you have to leave the computer to the others, right? So these are the day-to-day examples. So always when you are reading any subject, any topic in computer science, associate that to your day-to-day life. What you do in a college, or what you do in a home, or what you do in a group or in sports, etc. Then probably you will be able to understand fairly better, and you will be able to appreciate that, right? So how do we resolve this? In the case of control hazard, if other batch is already waiting to use your computer and you have not completed, there are only two choices. Either you stop your programming and come and redo again in the next batch, or tell this person, request the new batch to wait for another X number of minutes to occupy. Then you can avoid the control hazard. Data hazard. Two people are trying to use, probably your lab supervisor will not allow two people to use the same computer because it's an examination hall. So that you have to again avoid. So this way, all the pipeline limitations can be avoided or challenged or can be controlled. So here are some of the simple mechanisms. Interlock logic detects hazards and fixes them. If the microprocessors are interlocked with the pipeline stages, then it fixes them. There is an intelligent logic available in the microprocessor, right? If there is a stall, the data has said two people using the same computer, one person will have to just go out and not use the computer. So this will increase the CPI and decreases the performance, right? So if the more stall happens, if both of you start fighting for this, then nobody will win. Your time will be wasted, right? So better solution, partial stall. Have it get into a compromise, right? And say, okay, I'll use for 30 minutes, you use for 30 minutes. A compromise. So these are the ways in which the limitations can be overcome. Now, these are more details about these hazards. So, under structural hazard, data hazard, and control hazard, more details can be discussed here. I think I have another only 25 minutes to go, so I'll see whether I can complete. I've completed only 50% of the slides. Okay. I hope it's okay. If you want me to stop at 4 sharp, please let me know. 5 minutes or 10 minutes before. Okay. So dealing with structural hazards, it's a low cost, simple, and increases the CPI, the cycles per instruction, right? And this is a rare case normally. Normally structural hazards are normally not happening in microprocessors, because a microprocessor, when you purchase, they very clearly define what it can support, what it cannot support, what are all the drawbacks, and how you can use different pipelines, how you can use a cache, how you can use memory. They very clearly specify. So I don't think this will have any performance. But if you are using it for high computing purposes, yeah, it will have a performance impact. So then you have to go for a better processor. So a pipeline hardware resource will be useful for multi-cycle resources. It will give you a good performance if you design it very well. And sometimes it can become complex because your RAM is limited. The speed of RAM is not equivalent to the speed of your microprocessor. The microprocessor can do much faster, whereas your RAM may not be able to do that faster, because there is a read, write, fetch operation that it has to perform. So then what is the other solution? Replicate resource. Have multiple RAMs, have multiple resources, etc. So this will increase the cost and may not be recommended. So it can be reduced with these rules. So if you are a good programmer, what you could do is okay. So if you're a good programmer, what you can do is, when you write a program, make sure that each instruction what you use uses a resource only at most once. So if you're declaring variables, right? I, J, K, standard declaration, and you will never use J and K. Probably you will use only I. Or let's say you are defining I, J, and K, or registers AX, BX, and CX. Make sure that you use AX for accumulator only, BS for base pointing only, and CX for count only. So thereby, you use each instruction at most once for those resources, right? And use those resources only in the same pipeline as well. Don't change the pipeline. If two teams running in relay, if they change the track, then people will get confused. Why this person, he violated the rules of relay, right? So do not violate by changing the pipeline stage. Or, while we drive on the road, we change our left to right suddenly, and then it gets into an accident. That's all the examples, how you can think, to use a resource in the same pipeline stage. So use the resource, the same pipeline, and in one cycle only, and make it in one cycle. Don't try to multiply it for multiple cycles. So if you follow these principles as a programmer or as a designer of a computer, most of the RISC processors are designed keeping this in mind, right? So sometimes it will be very complex to do this for very complex situation. So then, you need to understand how the instruction fetch happens and memory stages happen, and you have to redesign your program or redesign your interface logic with the computing systems. So here is a simple example. Let's say I have a machine with a dual port and memory, and I have a machine with a single port and memory. But the single port and memory has a better processor with faster clock rate. So it is like the faster the microprocessor, so Though the memory is single ported, it should perform faster, not necessarily, right? So let's assume that the cycles per instruction is 1 for both the situations, and loads are 40% of instructions executed. Let's assume that 40% of instructions are already executed and available in the execution register. So then what happens is, you need to identify the pipeline depth, which I defined initially, right? So you need to have a same set of pipelines of the same length and the depth, whether you have a 5-stage pipeline, 7-stage pipeline, etc., right? And if you compare these two, the dual ported memory with the lesser faster clock rate of the microprocessor has no stalls, and it is much more faster. Why? Because of the dual ported memory. Because in one port you can write, another port you can read. In another port you can write, and in another port you can read. Whereas in single ported memory, both read and write operations will have to happen on the same register, right? So this is one example. So this is where the design of computer will come in picture when you design with microprocessors. Data hazards, you know, this occur, there are instructions active and no need to access the same memory locations. So if you are trying to access the same memory location, like the one computer per person, that example, instruction A and instruction B, and B wants the read and write on the data before A does, right? So if you want to do that, let's say the person is already have occupied a computer, he is working on a program, but the other person, let's say, is little more hefty and fat, and he has taken a good lunch. So he want to come and bulldoze his other friend who is sitting in the finger. I have come, now you get up, right? So that is not possible. This is just an example. Don't take me wrong, guys, right? So this violates. So again, this creates a dependency, and in compiler nomenclature, this is called as dependency. So this hazard can again be avoided through programming. Then write after read. So you cannot write while you are writing, another person cannot read. This is called as anti-dependence in the compiler terminologies. So all instructions take 5 stages, and reads are always in stage 2 because instruction fetch and decode happens, and writes are always in the last stage, which is the 5th stage. Once it gets access to the memory address. Then similarly, write after write. You cannot write a result and again try to write another result, another on the same. That means you are overwriting. That means it is output dependence, again in the compiler terminology. So if you look at compiler errors and warnings, they will show all these things. If you're very careful in analyzing your compiler output, the compiler will tell you that these are all the dependence you have, and you as a programmer can correct it then and there itself. So the simple solution to read after write, RAW here stands for read after write. So hardware detects read after write, then it stalls, it waits, then assumes a register to read each cycle. So this is low cost to implement and very simple, and it reduces the inter-process communication within the microprocessor to minimize the stalls. So similarly, you can do minimizing raw stalls, bypass or forward or short circuit. We normally use in computer terminology, we use a word called as computer science, we call it as forward. Forward it to another register and then let it compute there, right? So these are crucial for the read after write hazards, which can be managed. Now let's come to control hazards. This is, we need to find a destination of a branch, like the example of traffic which I gave. You want to come to college, there is a traffic block and you need to take a deviation. So your reaching college could be a few minutes late or a few minutes earlier, depending on the traffic, right? So we can't fetch any new instruction until we know the destination. So if you do not know where the destination is, like the college, if there are multiple deviations happening on the road, then you end up more time on the road. So again, there is two-part solution. There is a two-part solution. Determine which deviation you need to take, so that either you reach earlier or you reach few minutes late, and compute the distance, the speed at which you need to travel. If I have to take the traffic example, right? So here in the computing language, in the program, what you have written, decide where you need to take the branch and how to get the address of the destination, and compute the address and put the branch accordingly. So this way you can control the hazards. So there are different 5 branch hazard alternatives essentially for programmers, programmers who wants to program. Stall until branch direction is clear. There is one option in the traffic. Yeah, you will tell your professor saying, okay, that there is traffic block. I cannot move. I want to travel only on this road, and I will come when the traffic is cleared. Probably you will never go to college on that day, right? The predict branch not taken. So you are taken a deviation that's a new road which you are not familiar with. So you may have to experiment ifs and buts when you take a branch. So similarly, when you do a programming, you take a branch in such a way that if you have not do not know the logic properly, then understand the logic and then try to put the logic. Then predict branch taken. Let's assume there is a failure which has happened to your program, and what is the probable cause of this failure at this branch? So investigate your program and take the branch. Let's say you took the deviation on the road and reached, but you reached another location and which is a little far away from your college. So you need to stay for a minute and think, okay, if I take this crossroad, I will reach there, probably, right? So that is called as prediction of branch. It is not um, what is called not astrology or anything here. You have to predict and you have to estimate how to do or execute both the paths. The branch taken, the previous predict branch which is not taken, and the branch taken, see what is best and then do that. And finally, delay the branch. You put no operations. No operation gives you 1 millisecond in some microprocessors. So you can put some delay time in your program so that the control is still continuous and pipeline happens. For example, let's say you know that the traffic block is only for 5 minutes till some VIP goes away. So you have two choices. Either you can wait for 5 minutes and then come on the same road, or you take a deviation, right? So this is how the delayed branch happens, where to get the instruction to fill the branch delay slot. So I've given you the practical example of a traffic, so keep that in mind. And before a branch instruction or before the target address, before a fall through happens, if a branch is not taken, or canceling the branches, you can even cancel the branch, right? So these things will be very effective in a single branch delay slot if you use a good compilers, and those compilers will really point out some of these errors. So compiler static prediction, either you take or you don't take branches, it improves the strategy for placing instructions in the delay slot, right? So backward branch prediction and profile based prediction. I mean, these two strategies we can talk from a programming language for many hours. Probably you can refer some books to get more details about these areas. So what makes pipelining hard? One of the fundamental topic which you have to see why pipelining is hard is primarily because of interrupts. There are different set of interrupts. Control C is a keyboard interrupt. There is a non-maskable interrupt generated from a microprocessor. There are interrupts generated from a read-write devices like hard disk, printers, which are connected, or other devices which are connected within the computer system. So some of the examples of interrupts are power failing, arithmetic overflow if there is a wrong instruction, IO device request pending for a printing or something like that, or yeah, OS call. Yeah, Balaji? Okay, sure. Okay, sure. 10 more minutes. Okay, okay, sure. Yeah, thanks. So these are the things which makes the pipelining hard: power failing, arithmetic overflow, IO device request, OS call, and page faults, which happens in the paging mechanism of the random access memories. So it can also be an exception traps also, which are related to linking to return address of a program, saving the PSWs, or changing into kernel mode, etc. So there are 5 instructions: how to stop a pipeline, how to restart a pipeline, who caused the interrupt. You know, these are the investigations. As a programmer, as a designer, as a user of a computer, you have to understand before you make a decision. So if it is in the delayed slot, save multiple program counters, save next program counters, return sequence. There are different solutions available if it is in a delayed slot. And each stage has a different problem that causes interrupt, whether it's a page fault, undefined illegal opcode, is it an arithmetic interrupt, or a page fault, is it because of memory protection violation. you know these are the place where you can check some of this. Another one could be exception in the memory stage. If a fault has occurred before the load that has happened in the pipelining device. And address modes, if you are doing an auto increment I++ example, and you are doing a J++ increment, but you are not using J, but you are using J in an incorrect way, then it will auto increment but it will not execute. And handling multiple cycle operations, if you lead to multiple pipeline complexity, every pipeline will have to wait. So floating point operations, all floating point scientific operations has a long execution time. Divide, square root, etc. has a long execution time. So these things will have to be looked into, right? So with this, probably the last 4 slides of what makes pipelining hard, I went little fast because I have only another 7 minutes to go. So let me just summarize what we did today. We talked about a brief about computer architecture, what's a general purpose efficiency, why pipelining gives you efficiency, and why is pipelining processing is important, what are the 5 stages of loading, execution mechanism, and limitations and challenges, or those things that we have discussed today. With this, let me first thank all the staff, the dean, the department staff, and all the students to give me an opportunity to talk about this session. Of course, I have not written all this note myself. There are great details that takes considerable time, to prepare for the audience. I have prepared this presentation exclusively for SRM audience based on my discussion with Professor Balaji, what they like to hear. So if there is any misses and not correct, you can always reach out to me and I will clarify. Of course, there are many books, resources available. Lot of books are prescribed by your college, internet, other learning sites. And of course, my experiences over the years also I have put into it. And that's why you don't see this like a textbook related sequence, right? Thank you. Thank you for your time and opportunity. I'm open for any questions. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead. Okay. See, the microprocessor is a hardware. It's a hardware, right? At the VLSI level, they have to change it at the silicon level. That's what I called it as a structural hardware. So the next version of the processor. So if you are just using, let's say, Intel microprocessor, you can write to Intel and tell them that, okay, I'm using it for this purpose. This is not happy, and give a case study. They will evaluate with you, and then they will change in their next processor. That's called as a structural hardware limitation, right? So you can increase a store. Whether increasing storage is correct or increasing register is correct will be determined by the designer of the microprocessor based on the application, target application that you are trying to do. Yeah, that's what I discussed. The structural hazards is hardware dependent. You will not be able to go through it. Is it? You can do a workaround with regard to the hardware that you have. I gave the example of a bicycle and a two-wheeler, automatic two-wheeler, right? So if you are using a bicycle, you cannot make it an auto-geared vehicle. Probably you have to attach some equipment to it, right? So you cannot do a structural changes, but data changes and hard control hazards, you can do it through programming, through redesigning your software, through redesigning your operating system fundamentals. Yeah, there are different sort of stages available. There are 5-stage pipeline, 7-stage pipeline, 13-stage pipeline. I know i860 microprocessor, which is a RISC processor, has got 13-stage pipeline. So it depends on your application, right? You can always have a higher large processor with large pipelines, but if you are not utilizing it, then you are wasting your money. But if you are fully utilizing it, yeah, then you are benefiting from it. You can always have higher pipeline stages. Thank you. Good afternoon. Sorry? Okay. Industrial RISC and CISC. See, CISC is a very standard microprocessor, which is currently all the automobile industry are using CISC microprocessors. Because I know 10 years back, if I remember right, one of the car vendors started with 80, 85 microprocessor 10 to 15 years back, when they opened a center in India, one of the international company, right? Now people are using microcontrollers and a combination of CISC processors in most of the automobile industry, but the automobile industry is also looking at using advanced processors specifically made for automotive industry. Because today you may have heard a word called as IoT, interoperability technology, right? There are interoperability. You can control a refrigerator sitting in office. You can control your mobile or your camera sitting remotely in your college, etc. Right? So the RISC processors are predominantly used in scientific community where there is a lot of number crunching is needed, where supercomputing power is needed. This is the knowledge that I have. Thank you.
Sir, excuse me, sir. Excuse me, sir.
Yes, go ahead.
Sir, I have a doubt.
Yes, go ahead.
Sir, how to predict the branch instruction at the earliest?
Okay.
Prevent
Okay. This is an interesting question, but this will take a little long time to answer. Prediction is a mechanism. It is by there are different methods, trial and error, by scientific method, and so on. Now, let me say a prediction. Let me go back to the traffic example, right? You came to a traffic spot, you are traveling to college, and you see that there is a road blockage. The police cops do not allow you to go in that road for some reason. So that was unpredicted by you, right? When you came till you came to that spot, it was unpredicted. Now you have come, now you know that there is a blockage. Now you have to think what is the easiest way for me to go to college? Which way I should go? Either you wait there till the traffic clears, or you take a prediction, you take an assumption, saying, okay, let me take road A, road B, and then road C, and then I will touch my college main road. That is called prediction. So now coming back this into programming, right? Let's say you have written a piece of code, and that piece of code does a branching at some point in time where it is going into another function, or it is calling another function, or calling an API, and it is failing at that point in time without performance. So what you have to do is you have to investigate your main code and the calling code and where it is writing and how it is writing by debugging. You get my point? It is easier said than done, but you have to remember that traffic example which I gave you, so you take the best guess, which is the best way to avoid. So yes, which API is causing the problem, which system call is causing the problem. You have to debug through the logs or through step and trace or through debugging mechanism, and then predict. And then make an assumption and then predict that and then put a new rule and see whether it goes through. Or scientifically sit down and then review the entire code and then see where the branch is happening and then rectify the code, which is not prediction, which is called re-architecting. Okay?
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Did I answer you?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, students. It was interesting, to meet, though I did not meet all of you, but I see there is 3 room full of people out there. All the best for you. 15th. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye. Thank you. Thank you.